Welcome back to our series on spiritual exploration. My name's Ollie, and my guest for the third time in a row is Greg Ferguson. How you doing, Greg?
I'm doing awesome, thanks.
So last time, well, actually, let's recap the whole thing. Episode one or part one was no belief is true. That's where we started.
Right.
That proposition. Then we moved on to talk a little bit more about the origins of beliefs, how beliefs are formed, and we kind of touched a little bit on sort of how to question them or methods of questioning them. Hoping to get into that in more detail in the future video. And so, yeah, basically, you set it up last time as moving into somewhat uncharted territories with the next few slides that we're going to visit. And so I'm really excited about that, and I will just throw it to you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, if somebody's watching this, I would encourage them to at least watch the one just prior to this. I think it's pretty important to see as a precursor to this one. So the first thing I would like to talk about is the how the beliefs shape our perspective, and or vice versa. You could look at that. How does our perspective shape our beliefs? Either one, but they're very, very correlated in my view. And what I wanted to introduce was this concept called the levels of consciousness. This is not new, but this is still going to be needed to be understood along with the beliefs as baseline as we move forward. But some of the things that I've got in this description here of these diagrams start to become a framework by which you can look through not just the belief system, but now it helps you to understand everybody else. So now you can say, okay, I know what my beliefs are. I kind of know what the origins are. I know kind of how they're situated and how they affect me. But now you start to look around and you go, well, I see. Okay, now because they have a belief system that's kind of in this particular level, that now can help explain some of their views, some of their behaviors, some of their perspectives. And then once we get done with that, now we'll talk about what can we do to change those in ourselves. We can't necessarily change it in other people. But if we wanted to change, now we can talk about the mechanism to be able to change that. So let's take a look at that first diagram that you have here. This one is very simple, and the next one is just going to be a more complicated version of that. This one is very simple, that it just talks about the levels of consciousness. There's 3 levels here. There's one that's called the emotional context. The middle one that I've got labeled here is the logical context. And then the next one up is called the spiritual context. There is one above that we'll see in the next diagram. Now, what this represents is just the levels of consciousness. I want to re-emphasize that this is not good or bad. This is not necessarily anything of judgment. In fact, somebody asked me the other day, isn't this just a ranking system? And the answer is absolutely not. And the reason it's not is that if you have a wall of bricks and you look at that wall of bricks, the bricks at the top are no more important or no less important than the bricks at the bottom. It is what it is. It's just where we came into the world. We talked about the unconscious and the collective, and then the unconscious in the last episode that we had, and that's where we are. In fact, if you wanted to sort of draw a level of awareness, you certainly may not be aware of a lot of these things toward the lower end of this diagram, but as you rise higher in levels of consciousness, you become more and more aware of the things that are going on around you. The aware more of your beliefs, become more aware of your surroundings and the framework itself. So that particular one. So let's take a little bit of a look. So what the little black dot that's on there, I call that content, and then I got this spotlight of perspective. So that spotlight of perspective is, let's call that you. That's you. It's just a little drawing of an eyeball, but that's you. And then you can see that content at that particular level. If your spotlight of perspective, in other words, if you're in the logical context, you can see content that's around that, and that kind of makes sense. It's the context that you're talking about, and you can see content within a certain level of context. So, I mean, a very, very simple thing is if you're in North Carolina, like I am, you can see things that are in North Carolina. And if you're in, Vancouver, you're near Vancouver, right? Vancouver, you see things that are near Vancouver. It's a very, very simple concept. But there's other people that are below there in terms of consciousness, and there's other people that are higher up in terms of consciousness. You may not be able to see what they see, or more importantly, you might see something very similar, but you don't see it in the same way.
Mm.
That's what the importance of this level thing, these levels is. Now that's a very, very simplistic view. And what I would like to do and spend a good amount of explanation on is going to the next picture, the next diagram, which is the same diagram with just a whole bunch more stuff included in it. The next diagram, let's start at the bottom there where it's got emotional, right down, relatively down the middle. It says emotional. And then, of course, right up above that, logical, spiritual, and then above that is all that is in the different colors. This is a very, very busy diagram, and I'd like to spend a little time going over it. The best way I know how is to keep everything in perspective by putting it there. So the emotional one at the bottom, and you got the logical and the spiritual and all that is going up the middle there. Let's talk about that emotional level for a second. The emotional level is the one that is, I would call it the gut level. This is not this is not necessarily all the pleasant emotions that you might feel. This is, at least in my description, it's not the love and the joy and all those kinds of things. These are typically down here or with fear. It's driven mostly by fear. There is a scale on the left-hand side in white that you can see that says love and fear. So that's the scale of love and fear, and that demonstrates the amount of love that, with a capital L, not emotional attachment love, but universal love that's within these levels, or that becomes apparent in these levels. Now there's a lot of fear, so the love is at one end of that and fear is at the other. And that's from the Course in Miracles, that there's only two emotions, love and fear. But the fear end of it has connected with it guilt and worry and jealousy and regret and denial. It also has greed and pride and envy and all these, the ones that are in small print down there. These are all a lot of words that all have to do with the same negative emotions that are along this area down here in the emotional section. So what we have is in traditional, like you said, Vedantic spirituality, this is called the tamas, T-A-M-A-S. This is not new. This is from the Upanishads, and this is also from the Bhagavad Gita. So that when you talk about tamas, and then it goes up to rajas, and it goes up to sattva, then those are the different levels described in those texts from a very, very long time ago. So associated with that are some of these other things that we'll talk about. I do want to describe these other levels first, and then we'll talk about how the things that transcend the vertical part of this. So when you move up into logical, the crossover, that transition of that red line, now that's a major shift of context. I've got that labeled on the very right-hand side, major shifts of context, where when you cross over that red line and you cross over that yellow line and then you cross over that blue line, those are major, major shifts in terms of your perspective, in terms of your whole entire being. Now, when you're in that middle section called logical there, when you get into that logical, this is now more geared with the head. This is more geared with logic, and when you get more geared with your mind. So this is now when in physiological terms, now we're talking about with that frontal cortex that's at the front of your brain that many animals don't have, or most animals don't have. We're talking about science and economics and reason and medicine and observation and cause and effect and all the math and proof and experimentation, all those words that are in there. This all has to do with logic. Now this is in a level of consciousness that has to do with, mostly having to do with the brain and the intellect.
Now I got a question for you real quick. At this level is where the concept of self probably starts to materialize, wouldn't you say?
I would say that this is the time when you start to recognize it. Yes, the one that's emotional. Let's call that the survival instinct.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's if you can put it into a particular perspective and call that, this is something that many animals have also, is this fear and this natural protection, this natural survival instinct. Okay. Right. Now, when you move up into the logical, now we're starting to try to use more logic. Now, many people, I would say most people, have some of both, and a lot of people have some of the higher levels as well. But most people have a rational brain. But a lot of times, when you go to do something, you're not actually always acting very logically. I mean, a lot of times because we all have all of this. I don't want to say that we're just in one level. We all have some of all of these. But sometimes when you just do something completely, what you call completely emotional or completely illogical, if it's negative, then you're probably working off of that lowest level that's on the diagram here. When then we move across that yellow line, that's another major transition point into the spiritual levels. This is where your heart starts to take over. And these are some of the words up here that we look about. This has to do with faith and devotion and truth and forgiveness and humility and unconditional love, thankfulness. A lot of those words that are on this chart. That this is peace, whereas the other levels have to do with some level of discomfort. The mind is trying to figure things out, and the body is also trying to react that way. So now we're starting to become at peace. So we're starting to have forgiveness. We're starting to have empathy. We're starting to have this level of acceptance that a lot of times comes with people. If you study spiritual kinds of people, a lot of times they look like they have that real peaceful look about them, and the folks that are in this spiritual, sometimes this level, most of the time, they have this less of a need to argue, less of a need to be combative, less of a need to debate. It's just because they're going like, oh, well, that's the way I see it, and if you see it differently, that's okay too.
Mm-hmm.
It's an allowance. It's an acceptance level. Mm-hmm. And it's an unconditional level of unconditional love. And we'll talk about that again. And then the next one, that's all that is when you end up making that last major transition, and that ends up becoming what you might be called touched by something, or you might end up going non-dual in different ways. That's when everything starts to become one, and the brain is no longer engaged at that level. Then you're just a physical entity, and you're a lot higher up on that consciousness scale. And when it says I up there at the very top, then that becomes the one I. That's not just I individually. That's the one. That's when everything starts to become all as one kind of a deal. Mm-hmm. All right.
Awesome, man.
Any questions about that right now?
Honestly, you're doing a great job. I don't really think there's much I can add or ask at this point. All I will say is that, of course, as I'm looking at this and you're explaining it to me, I'm relating it back to myself and my own experiences, because of course I can't know anybody else's experiences.
Right.
And I'm trying to kind of frame my own experiences into this system, and I can definitely see a lot of value in the way you've laid it out. I mean, it's given me a different sort of angle on what occurred with myself a few years back.
Well, let's go vertical a little bit on this. All right. I mean, we were kind of going a little bit horizontal. I was describing each one of those levels. Let's go vertical and talk about the differences between the levels. Let's go from that white arrow that goes up and down that's got fear and love. The way that it looks to me is that love is always here, and it's always present. And it's just the amount of the recognition of that love that we can see when we are at these different levels. If we are at the lowest level, that love is actually blocked by fear. When I say blocked, it's occluded, and you can't feel the love that's all around us. You can't sense all that love because there is a layer, or there's a substrate of fear that surrounds you or the people that you're around. And that makes it difficult to see the love that's available.
But the analogy that came to mind when you said that is when there's a lot of clouds in the sky, the sun is still there, but you can't really get its light, right?
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yep. And then in my view, all of those clouds are beliefs.
Of course.
That is what we're talking about.
Nice.
Yes. And we'll talk about how do you remove those clouds, or how do you let the clouds blow away. I'm not saying you can physically remove clouds, but you can certainly let them dissipate on their own.
Right.
We'll talk about that. Yes, but that is a perfect analogy. And when it's completely cloudy and it's a depressing day, let's say it's completely overcast, and maybe it feels like it's raining all day long, weather-wise, it sometimes has an effect on our personality that particular day. But some people are walking around, with the rain in an emotional state a significant amount of their lives, if not their entire lives. Yeah. So that's what that is. So the amount of love and the amount of, let's call it sunshine, that's showing on that love scale on the left and the right. Most of those on the bottom, most of those words that are on there in small, shame and hatred, self-righteousness, envy, misery, greed, pride, those are all, in my view, all based in fear. Every single one of those, everything negative that you can come up with in terms of that is based in fear. Revenge, violence, blame, entitlement, every single one of those is based in fear in some way, shape, or form. And fear comes from beliefs. Okay, so if you fear something, then you have a belief about something, and then that's going to make you go back into that cycle we talked about in the last section. You have a belief that's going to trigger an emotion. How about that? The emotional level right here. The stronger your beliefs, the more the emotional triggers, back to the one we had the other day when we're going through our belief cycle, the heavier and the stronger your beliefs, the more triggered your emotions are going to be. And then that's why now we're at that emotional level. And now you're going to be in that cycle where you get a whole bunch of thoughts. And a lot of those thoughts are going to be these negative thoughts, which are going to just simply reinforce the beliefs. Okay? That's how this works. Now look over here on the far right, the very far right, where it says the cycle of fear. There's a little circle right there. That's exactly what I'm talking about. If you have fear and it's based in belief, you're going to have these emotions get triggered, and you're going to worry, and you're going to think about them, and you're not going to be able to even do positive affirmations. And like the self-help world says, hey, don't have negative thoughts, think positive thoughts. Well, that's what that is right there. It's trying to fix that, the cycle of fear in a little different way than I am proposing here. But what they're trying to do is add different beliefs in the self-help world. I'm calling that the self-help world, where there's thousands and thousands of books that are written about affirmations and just think positive and all that, where all you're doing is just trying to essentially turn off that thought, those negative thoughts that are down there in the bottom, and add to your belief system that there's something positive about it. This is not actually dissecting your belief system. This is adding to your belief system. We talked about that last time.
Yep.
The painting over the rust I was talking about. Now, when you are in the emotional state and something grabs you, so let's call self-help in that logical state, all right? So self-help is at the logical level, and it's pulling you up from that bottom level of consciousness. This is my view. And I think that's attractive. If you're so inclined and you're at a level and you can see the level just above you, then that will be attractive to you if you're so inclined to try to get out of these negative emotions that you are feeling potentially, or the negative results that you're achieving in your life or whatever. So if somebody is teaching you the law of attraction, and you go, are you sick and tired of being poor? Are you sick and tired of paying the bills or whatever it is? And once you at that bottom down there at that bottom level, once you feel enough pain, then you will start to seek out some other version, some other solution to get you out of that pain. And now it happens at the next level, at the logical, when you're in the middle of that self-help world, and you've had all the self-help you can stand, and you've done everything that all the self-help books say. Now you may start looking to another level that's higher above that. And that's what happened to me. So I will say that it is effective. Now, if I'd have tried to go from where I was at the bottom of this chart all the way up to non-duality, it wouldn't have. In fact, it would have not only not made sense. I would have, and I did reject it. All right. So that's one of the reasons why I say don't necessarily try to reject all the self-help right away, because it's very effective for its place. That make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. I mean, like I said, I benefited from self-help myself. Eckhart Tolle and Wayne Dyer, as you said, and James Allen, godfather of self-help, As a Man Thinks. These are all powerful, influential works that I still refer to these days. So there's a lot of merit in them, but as a standalone solution or as a singular path, it may have some pitfalls and some obstacles in its way.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense to me too. Yeah. All right, so we have the cycle of fear. We were down there in the lower right-hand corner, and we're now trying to make that phase transition. When I say phase transition, there's a whole lot of difference between ice and water, and there's a whole lot of difference between water and vapor, the steam. So that's the level of the level of change that we're talking about here. We're not talking about just warming up the water. We're talking about an entirely different product when you go from one to the next. Yeah. So when we move into also there's an influence of ego line over there on the right hand side. It's up and down. The influence of the ego. Now this is not a let's say dialogue with me and you about what is the ego, but the ego's purpose for the development of the human species is to protect the human species and to get it to survive. And at least that's one way of looking at it. Now, the influence of the ego is very strong at the lower end of this scale that I'm presenting here, and it's significantly less influential when you get higher and higher up. So what we're talking about is releasing more and more of the effects of the ego. We're shedding the ego. We're not going to abandon it altogether, but we're definitely able to shed the effects of the ego itself. And the ego, if you had to ask me what's the ego, I would just say it's your belief system.
Yeah, an amalgamation of all your beliefs, right?
Yes, and the stronger your belief system is, then the stronger the ego and the stronger the influence it'll have. Kind of weird out right there next to that line, it talks about the influence of the ego. The way that the belief system is manifested is in superstition down there below the red line.
Mm-hmm.
Think about some tribes that are out that we've discovered, and they see airplanes going overhead. They're superstitious, is that those are some sort of iron birds that are going to raining down destruction on us or something. If they're having contrails, for example, that's the contra. People call them the chemtrails. So that when you get below this line and you have superstition, this is where conspiracy theories lie. This is where a lot of your beliefs are almost out of control. When you talk about this superstition area down here.
Mm-hmm.
Superstition, you could actually put in parentheses conspiracy theories in here, because if you're witnessing something or experiencing something or seeing something, then the first thing you're going to try to do is make sense of it in terms of what's happening. And if all you have is the small amount of insight that you have, you'll make stuff up to try to make it fit your own narrative. Now, the next level up would be in the mind and the intellect, and then that would say, let's go searching for other things that it might be. That's the scientific method, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're below that, I'm not talking scientific method. I'm going like that's what it looks like, and because it was raining or because it didn't rain for 3 weeks, and I must have been because I did something bad, and I got to repent, and I'm going to do a dance to the rain gods, and then look at that, it rained the next day, so that was cause and effect.
Yeah, correlation does not equal causation, tribesmen.
Right. Yeah, and not at all, really. So that's what that leaves. Now you go up to the next level of that vertical scale, and it says beliefs. Now we're adding beliefs, and those might actually be very, very functional beliefs, and they might, and of course science is full of completely functional beliefs. So I don't want to say that those are wrong, and that's what's gotten us out of the Middle Ages into the Renaissance, and then from the Renaissance and the Industrial Revolution, and then into today. So those are very strong and they're very powerful, but they're certainly going to only take you so far when we get further into this. Let's talk about the tyranny of the mind right there. That's the one. We had the cycle of fear on the right-hand side. Let's talk about the tyranny of the mind. All right, so this is beliefs. This level of beliefs is that our intellect can figure everything out. Right, and I've been here too. So when you think that your mind can figure everything out, and you think that science has the answers to everything, then you're in the tyranny of the mind, and you're squarely at the mercy of cause and effect. And here's why I say you're at the mercy of cause and effect, because if everything you witness or see or experience or sense or perceive, if you feel like that has to have some sort of a precursor, and you can identify what that is, then you're going to be at the mercy, or you're going to be a victim, in my view, of the belief in cause and effect. Mm-hmm. Now, does cause and effect work at this level? It absolutely does. I mean, there's things if you drop, Newton figured out, it's called the Newtonian level of thinking. If you drop an apple, it's pretty much going to drop every single time. So for a certain level of context, those hold true, but they don't necessarily hold true across all contexts, and we'll find that out. So when we talk about the tyranny of the mind means to me that and that's a term that I came up with, is that at least to describe this particular level, is that if you believe that your mind can figure everything out all on its own or with other minds, other people's minds, and you can discuss that, then you're going to bump up against that yellow line right there, that line of intuition that I've called the line of intuition there. The first one was called the line of the red one was the line of rationalization. And the next one up is the line of intuition. Now, which means that if you don't suspend the belief that the mind knows everything, then you have a very low chance of crossing over that yellow line. The only way at that point, if you trust that mind so much that it knows everything, and a lot of people in science are in here. There are a lot of people in science are in this, and there's a lot of well-meaning atheists that are in here that say, look, the only thing that exists is the things that I can see. Well, you don't really need anything more than cause and effect when you're in the scientific world. When you're even in medicine, to a certain extent, when you're in medicine and you know that if you cut this thing out or you cut that thing off, or you replace it with another organ, that will repair it for the time being. As long as that's your gig, you don't have any other reason to doubt that. Yeah. I think there's an awful lot of doctors that have been in the operating room where something went completely unexpectedly, and they saw either a spontaneous healing, or they saw somebody die and come back, or they saw something they absolutely could not explain. Here's where medicine is, Western medicine. Here's where Western medicine is. I think they see a lot more stuff than they admit to, and if they start admitting to it, then they might start losing some of their sovereignty, as it were.
Sure, yeah, and that's a sort of a symptom of that either-or mindset that is infecting us, as it were, because why can't it be a synthesis of Western and Eastern medicine? I mean, Western medicine has its place. It clearly works in a lot of ways and in a lot of settings, and then maybe Eastern medicine also has its place, and it's, you know what I mean? Like, why can't we integrate them both into one school of medicine that is all-encompassing?
Yeah, I totally agree. And the Western medicine thing is that we'll fix you, and if we can't, and we completely give up, well, then maybe you can try something else. So here's one of the symptoms of what's going on is if you're gonna, I call it banging your head on the bottom of that yellow line. So if you're banging your head on the bottom of that yellow line, there's two ways to go across that yellow line. One way is to become dissatisfied and then to seek other ways of doing that, which gets you moving into that. At least now, remember when we were down at that emotional level and we looked up and we saw self-help, and it helped us to get into that next level. Now we're bumping our head up against the bottom of that yellow line, and we're looking up and we're seeing, well, what is this thing about spiritual exploration? What do they have to offer? Those people seem like they're not really dissatisfied. A lot of those people are pretty look like they're at peace and what do they have that I don't have? All right, so one way is to start becoming a seeker. Right. The other way is to get forced across that line. That's going to be a near-death experience. That's going to be a major life shift. It could be a significant medical event. It could be the death of a loved one. It could be a divorce. It could be a bankruptcy. Major significant life event that does what? Makes you question your beliefs. Question your beliefs. I can really spin this all the way back around every time, can't I?
I hope you do. I mean, it's a helpful reminder. I mean, because we can get lost in this, but it really does come down to that, doesn't it?
That's exactly what this whole thing's all about. Yeah.
The latter is made out of getting rid of beliefs or questioning beliefs. It's a interesting metaphor, but.
Yep. So when you go across the red line, you're probably going to add beliefs. And when you go try to somehow get across that yellow line, you're actually going to be releasing beliefs, at least in or significantly changing beliefs or replacing beliefs at this point. So you're going to be replacing beliefs. Or if you go about it in a methodical way, you're actually going to be removing beliefs.
Yeah, consolidating them in some cases, right? Maybe,
yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
4 false beliefs are actually the result of one true belief that you misunderstood, and now all of a sudden you just got to worry about this one truth instead of these 4 lies, right?
Yes, exactly. The one true misunderstanding is that somehow we got separated from everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So, and every other belief came out of that. So yes, I'm with you on that. We're on the same page there.
Absolutely.
Now, so you got that next phase transition. I'm still on the right-hand side. Now you're in the discovery of the self with a higher S. So now notice how these cycles are getting bigger too. I put some thought into the drawings there. So the blue circle, I don't know if it has to be clockwise or not. I don't know, but the circle is getting bigger, and the discovery of the self now becomes what the cycle is. You got stuck in the theory of the mind before, and you got stuck down in the lower level of the fear and the cycle of fear. But now we're in the discovery of the self. So that's what those phase transitions are all about on the right-hand side. You move from beliefs. Now you don't necessarily have beliefs as much as you have knowingness. Knowingness. In other words, you don't necessarily have to believe something with your brain. Now you just kind of know something is because that's the way it is. It's a level of understanding, and I don't even want to use the word understanding, because knowingness is probably the word, but it's a level of knowingness that doesn't depend on the brain anymore. It doesn't depend on the intellect. It doesn't depend on cause and effect anymore. Now it's just, that's something that is patently obvious to me, and that's what that knowingness is all about.
So this is something that I have trouble with, and maybe we can chat about it real quick, because I get what you're saying. The sense knowingness is very different from a belief, but when you're at those lower levels, or when you're hanging out there, because you're not ever stuck anywhere, you're always, I think, moving around a bit. But sometimes you believe something so strongly, you know it with conviction, and you've spoken about this personally, about how in the past, let's say politically, you were on one side and you were damn sure that those beliefs or those approaches were 100% right. So how does a seeker like you and I, or anybody who's listening to this, how do you know the difference between this conviction that is so strong you believe it with all your soul, and knowingness, as you've labeled it? Because I agree there's a difference, and I think I know the difference based on feeling, but how can anybody know? How do you know that knowingness is not just another very fervent belief, for example?
Yeah, thanks for that question, because that's very, very, because you can have a belief down at the lower level, and it feels so strong that you go like, I know that. Yeah. So
exactly.
What's the difference? The difference is, at least in my perspective, is going to be that the knowingness is going to be of timeless truth. It's going to be timeless truth, not just what I learned. It's going to be a timeless thing, and you could call it faith, because you can, as opposed to belief. Actually, I got into a discourse just the other day on a chat with a guy who said that faith and belief were the exact same thing, and I said they're absolutely completely different to me. Is that when you're believing with your brain, and then you have a belief based on something, and then that's the belief is based on logic. It's based on experience. It's based on a lot of things, and you can say I know something is true, but when you and I think we talked about it in the last thing about that we did in the last episode about, at this point they're no longer, you don't have to be right about it. These might just now be preferences. Okay, yes. So this knowingness is a little bit more akin to a preference, and it could be faith. But if you don't want to go quite that far, you could say, well, I prefer love over fear, and that feels really good to me. And from a knowingness standpoint, not feeling down at the bottom of this chart here, but a feeling of knowingness that way. It's a softer thing. It's more of an intuition. It's not a cerebral thing. It's not an intellectual thing. It's more of an intuitional thing.
Well, and I think you touched on an important distinction, and that is the need to defend beliefs versus when you know something, there's no desire to defend it or argue about it or prove it, because you just know it.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. And if I ever find myself defending anything, I know I'm defending a belief.
Right, exactly. So that's a very, and I as you were talking, that just like totally became clear to me, and you said it. It's like, yeah, you're like, well, I prefer love over fear. Well, fear is better than love. Well, are you going to argue with that person? Of course not. You just know.
Exactly
this
right.
person's so lost. Like, sorry, you feel that way.
A knowingness, just you don't feel the need to defend it. Let's put it that way. It's just like it is what it is, and if you don't feel the need to defend it because it's so self-evident that you know that that's what it is, then it's a kind of a nice place to be. That's where peace is. If you're getting attacked and you feel the need to defend, then you're defending a belief. So when all these people are at peace, and when they're getting attacked, and then if they just sit there and they smile and they nod, and it might be frustrating to the attacker, but to them it's a knowingness, and they don't have to defend it because it is what it is.
Yeah. Awesome. So, okay. Yeah. Thanks for hitting that point for me. So yes, let's continue.
I didn't actually have that one like in my holster. We discussed that together. We brought that one out together. So.
Absolutely. That was awesome. Yeah.
So now let's talk about, some of these are a little bit more self-explanatory. We got gut, head, and I'm moving actually from right to left vertically. Gut, head, and heart. That's the method by which these different levels happen here. Gut, not from an intuition standpoint, but gut from a reactional standpoint. In the head and then the heart. Then I put a little of the YMCA in there. You got the spirit, your body, mind, and spirit. The body, mind, and spirit are essentially the triumvirate of the entire person. Where this actually comes into play right here is maybe in addictions right here. This body, mind, and spirit. If you have a person who's addicted to alcohol or anything else, or any kind of a chemical, then you might have a way of going to some sort of a place where you are removed from that, and you no longer have access to it, right? So then the body can go through its withdrawals, and then it can go through it post-withdrawals, and then it can be in that post-withdrawal state. So you take somebody to an addiction center, and you take them out of the place for a 30-day period or whatever it is, or maybe 6 months or whatever, prison maybe, I don't know. But the body actually is no longer at that point addicted. But if you don't fix it at the mind level, and certainly if you don't fix it at the spirit level, and then you're painting over rust again. Right? It's not so much belief, but this is an integrated look at the 3 levels here. So you could even go to AA of some sort, and if you go into AA and you go, yep, that makes perfect sense to me, but it's a spiritual organization, and if you're saying like, I haven't drank in 32 days, and I believe everything they say, but you don't buy into the spiritual realm of it, then that's not going to be a complete healing.
Right.
That's the holistic, and that's when you're on these different levels. That's primarily where you're coming from, in terms of the ways that the way that those come through, the way that your personality comes through, the way that your life comes through. Let's go to any questions about that?
Yeah, about the whole thing, or?
No, just the spirit, mind, and body part.
Oh yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And
okay,
and I think you said that's the sort of triumvirate of the person. I think that's the triumvirate of the cosmos as well, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Because you got the body is the actual tangible stuff. Then you got the mind, which is hard to explain, but it still feels like it's local. And then spirit is non-local. Right. So body is the content, the atoms that are physically here. The mind is not necessarily in the atoms, but we tend to think that the mind is still in the body itself, and then the spirit is extra body, whatever that's called, where it's outside the body and it's around everything.
Yeah. Awesome.
We're still moving from right to left. We're going feel, understand, and know. That's similar to the superstition, beliefs, and knowingness. Just another way of saying that. What is it that you're what is it that you're using for that? And what does it feel like? It feels like I feel this, or I understand this, or I know this. It's very similar to the superstition, beliefs, and knowingness that was on the other side. So let's go to the left-hand side here, and let's talk about free will. Oh boy. Talk about does free will exist? Well, we could talk for another hour about this, but I would say that the answer is yes, and the answer is no.
I agree completely.
Yeah, so here's why. Because generally speaking, at the lower level, in the below the red line, you're really not acting out of free will. You're acting out of reaction. You're acting out of nature. If somebody attacks you, you attack back. So it's a survival mechanism. So do you have free will? You can think that you do, but you might not. It's defense. It's territorial. It's all those things. It's greed for the purpose of, because a lot of these words down here are related. It's fear, and it's fear because I feel like this body, this physical thing that I live in, is not going to survive. Okay, so I feel like I have to do these things. People, this is why there's a lot of crime down. I mean, most crime is below the red line, and that crime is based out of fear. That crime is based out of fear that I'm not going to survive. So I have to kill other people, or I have to steal their stuff, or whatever it is that those crimes are. I have to assault people. I have to rape people, or whatever it is. Those are animalistic actions, and based in the context of this diagram, that I would say that many people. I don't think I'm going out on a limb here. Many people that are in prison don't really have that this is a challenge that we have in understanding this whole entire chart is that there's a whole bunch of people who go, well, they shouldn't have done that, and they should have known better. Well, maybe they didn't. Okay, now does that mean that they don't need to be in jail? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we need to remove them from society to keep them from hurting everybody else, and to keep them from hurting themselves, and for the greater good of the society. I'm not doing that. What I'm saying is that all they're saying is, and a lot of the chronic unemployment, a lot of the chronic homelessness is down here, and if people just say, just go get a job. Well, it's probably more complicated than that. I'm not here to do politics, but if they're down below that line, it's something else going on, and it's not necessarily just the rational mind. Because if you're in the rational, the logical level, and you go, well, if you're homeless and you need to go get a job, then that'll fix everything. Well, they're down there in that level of consciousness. It's not allowing them to see things logically like you might be if you're using that approach.
Right.
So then you get to the assumption of free will. Moving up into the to the next level, it says assumption of free will. So do we have free will? And if you're in that middle section, the answer is yes. You can make decisions and you can influence your life, and it can certainly appear that way anyway. And you have that's why I call it the assumption of free will.
Yeah.
It's that when I make a decision, then that's going to directly affect. It's cause and effect, and cause and effect is very valid at this level. So if you do this, then you'll experience that. And in many cases, that's true. In most cases, when I say it's true, it appears true at that level of context. So if somebody says, do you have free will? Well, yeah, you do when you're at that level. Now, let's move up, and then I'll come back to that in a second. When you move up to the next level, it's called thy will be done. And now you've said, I don't know that I really have free will, but maybe everything's just happening synchronistically, or maybe it's God's will, or maybe these things are happening without a whole lot of my input. And the answer is all three, in my view. My answer is that when you're down low, you don't have as much control over your free will as you might think you do, or maybe not at all. In the middle level, you believe that you have free will, and then it very much looks like you do. And when you start to surrender to something that's greater than you, the spirit, the spiritual, the knowingness, the sattva, the discovery of the self, pretty much everything that's on that level, then when you start to experience everything that's on that level, then you start recognizing that some of this thing may not be exactly as mechanistic as it appears. So the free will is based in the belief in cause and effect. Are there miracles? Yeah, there are miracles. We call them miracles just because we can't explain them in the scientific field. And so when some things happen that either we didn't expect, or that we can't explain, or it doesn't have a clear cause and effect, we call that a miracle. Well, maybe that stuff's happening all the time, and we just don't recognize it. When you get to this next level, it appears that everything's happening spontaneously on its own in a miraculous way. Yeah, you can prefer things, and you can influence things, but that whole cause and effect thing starts to loosen up significantly at this level.
Yeah, that's.
I stopped there to let that sink in for a minute.
Yeah, no, this is awesome, man. You've really put this together nicely. I'm telling you, this is crazy stuff.
So I've been in a couple of different kinds of conversations with people about free will, and I've thought through it while I'm doing it, and everybody gives me cool input, and then I get there. Absolutely is free will. You absolutely can affect everything. And I go, well, you're coming right from that middle section. I believe that you believe that. Yes.
Yeah.
And it probably works for you. Yes. So at that level of context, that belief is true. Now, back to my original premise, no belief is true. Is that true at the next level up? Yeah, not all the time.
Right.
Is that belief true at the animalistic will level? Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
not all the time.
Yeah, it's interesting. So as I see it, or another way to look at this would be to say that the body has a kind of a will of its own, the mind has a kind of will of its own, and then the self with a capital S has a will of its own. And depending on where you're at, that's how you'll experience it. You know, if you're associating with the mind, you will just have that sort of assumption of free will. If you're really associating at the lower level, at the sort of direct, animalistic level, you're not even going to question whether you have free will, because you're just going to be reacting on instinct. And then when you get up to that next level, yeah, something different happens. I don't even know how to put that one into words too much.
Well, something real different happens is at some level you're just looking at the body going about its business, and you're there, but now you're not necessarily always inside the body. I mean, I'm not talking about out of body experience. I'm talking about something kind of different than that. But there are times, and I'm not in this state all the time, so I'm not claiming to be there. But it strikes me quite often. And it happens to me most of the time when I'm on I'm at the Y. I go to the Y to exercise. So if I'm at the Y and I'm on the elliptical machine, I like the elliptical machine because it's kind of like running, but it's kind of like not. I don't have to bang my knees, but I can close my eyes, because I can hold on to those things, the arm things.
Yeah.
I can close my eyes, my body can be moving, and I can actually be sitting there thinking, the body's doing this on its own. I'm not really making the body do this.
Yeah.
It's exercising itself, and I'm just here watching this. That's where I come into the watcher witnesser part of it. It's the easiest at that point in time. One night, not too long ago, my mind was racing, as it does, like a lot of people's minds are racing at night. You're trying to fall asleep, and you got all these thoughts thinking about things. Well, I had fallen asleep, and I woke back up. And my mind was racing about, whatever it was, daily business stuff. And I went like, this is exactly what I did. I go, I'm just going to let the mind do that, and I'm going to go back to sleep. That's
awesome.
So I said, go ahead, keep thinking about that stuff. I got better things to do.
Yeah. Good night. Oh man, that's so crazy.
I'm going back to sleep because the brain its job is to tune into thoughts. Its job is to make us aware of thoughts. Just like the liver's job is to produce bile, and the pancreas's job is to produce insulin. The brain's job is to get thoughts and put them in front of you. So I used to say that the brain's job is to produce thoughts, but I don't know that that's exactly the way I see it anymore. But anyway, so this thy will be done is that I think that now go back all the way to the far right where it says discovery of the self with the bigger S. Mm-hmm. Now you're starting to experience some of these things, and you realize that this body much of the time is actually doing things on its own. Can you remember every single thing you did yesterday? The answer is no.
I don't even remember driving home some days.
But it drove itself home.
Right.
The body did.
Pretty remarkable, isn't it?
Now, you do your videos in the car all the time, and you're very focused. Well, your body is doing something different. Your body's making sure you're not getting in a crash, and it's turning left, and it's turning right, and it's finding its way home. Yeah, so that's what I'm talking about, and it's a different experience. It's a phase transition, and it starts to becoming a lot different. Now, some people go in and out of across the line, back and forth a little bit, either on purpose, meaning they're seeking and they're trying to find these things. Some people get across it through meditation. Some people, like Eckhart Tolle, just wake up one day and they go, "What happened?" And they're well into that level, and they're going like, and they got no reference. They have no reference, and there's no reason for it to happen. He said he was in emotional pain, but not any more maybe than anybody else. And so so for some people, it's instantaneous. For many people who are done with self-help, they're sitting there reading all these spiritual books. They're seekers. But here's where my belief thing comes back in. If you're a seeker and you don't release some of those beliefs, you're just going to be banging your head on the bottom of that yellow line for a long, long time. If you're seeking and you believe that the next guru is going to give you the answer, it's not. That's the problem with it at that point. You're seeking something else, and you're just going to bump up against the bottom of that yellow line, left, right, left, right, left, right, and you're just going to bump up against that line. You're never going to break through. It'll be like we don't have ice on the lakes here, but I imagine if you're swimming under the ice, that's what it'd be like.
I gotta read something to you that just it came to me as you were talking about people who are looking for the next guru and all that kind of stuff. This is Rumi. He says, talking about it, reading books, and doing practices don't help. Soul receives from soul that knowing. The mystery of spiritual emptiness may be living in a pilgrim's heart, and yet the knowing of it may not yet be his. Wait for the illuminating openness, as though your chest were filling with light. And here's the line that triggered it all. Don't look for it outside yourself. You are the source of milk. Don't milk others. So the self-help and all of that stuff, people are looking for something and they think it's outside of themselves or it's in the body. And if they, lose weight or improve their skills and stuff, that they're going to find what they're looking for, but that's still all external.
Yep. Now, again, putting back into the context, the external stuff works when you're going from the one level to the next, crossing the red line. It is pretty effective in that regard if you apply it and you do all the things. But at some point, then it's not going to cure what's ailing you. So essentially, this is the same diagram that we looked at the last two. I cleaned it up, took all that other stuff off of there, because if we have an understanding of how that's working, now what we'll do is talk about the practicality of it in everyday life. Now, if you have two people that are down at the bottom in that same category, and in the emotional context, I call that limited perspective. See, the content is down there. The content is the little black dot. Doesn't matter what the content is. It can be something you're discussing. It can be something you're seeing. It can be something you're sensing. It's just content, whatever that might be to you. Yet the two different people down there that say more ego. I just had a description, meaning that those descriptions. Now these circles are actually a little different. If you look at that, the circles, the blue circles are the same size, but the red is compressed in these. The red is compressed, and it's got more ego, and so there's the distance between the red circle and the blue circle is the amount of ego that is inherent in that person. And now they're both looking at the content. Now the field of view, so the blue lines where they're looking at it, they can focus on that, and then the yellow lines represent how much bandwidth they have. They have so the blue lines represent what they're focusing on that are coming off of the eyeball, and the yellow lines represent the bandwidth that they can see, which is not a whole lot wider than what they're looking at. If you look at it that way, it makes sense. Yeah. So when you're arguing with somebody with a very, very limited perspective, with very, very strong beliefs, then they are not open in many more ways than one to other ideas, then they cannot see more than they're looking at.
Right.
So
there's no room.
Yep. So you have two people looking at the same thing, and if they happen to be down at the same level and they happen to be agreeing on what they're looking at, then maybe those are two members of a cult. I don't know. But they're able to see the same thing and agree on it, and there's not a whole lot of disagreement maybe. Now, the next level up, this is a person. Let's call this a person. I actually try to go away from actually using the name person, but I use like localization. This next localization, which is really a person, but is from a larger perspective in the logical context. This localization, this eyeball, has some ego, not as thick of an ego as the other two down below, is looking at the same thing where the blue line says focus, but the perspective is much wider. Okay, they actually have the perspective of being able to see not only at the level of where those are, but they actually have the ability to see some of the level above it as well. It's in their field of view. So they have a context that's coming from a logical context, and they are able to see what it is those other two are looking at. Now, here's the challenge, is that when this person in the middle, this localization, this person tries to use logic on the people that are in the emotional context, the logic doesn't work. When you try to argue with the person in the logical context, you try to argue with somebody that's down below, the argument, it just isn't going to even register. You're going to have somebody just screaming back at you. And what I see, and this is pretty funny, is you go on certain websites and you just watch a news broadcast, a news, 10-minute news update from, pick your news source, whether it's MSNBC on one end or Fox News at the other end or someplace in between. Then you'll start seeing a whole bunch of comments that come in down below, right? Well, some of those comments are pretty limited in their field of view, if you think about it. And so they're looking at the content that you're both looking at. That if you're at the logical, if you're trying to make sense of it from a logical perspective, and you're going like, that doesn't even make sense. Their comments don't even make sense. And from this description, what I'm portraying here is that, of course it doesn't. Of course it doesn't make sense. They're coming at it from something below the line of rationalization, or below the red line, that is. Mm-hmm. So below that line that says that I'm going to be able to describe what's happening and make it make logical sense. So
yeah, and for the person in that middle level to actually make any headway with the two people sort of at the emotional level, it would take probably a long time and a lot of discussion. It'd be like, okay, bring out your textbooks, class. We got to go over some history lessons, and we got to talk about this. And it's so far removed from the sort of their context that you could never really make headway without a very large discussion. And even then, they'd have to approach it with an open mind, right? So, I mean, yeah, what you're saying resonates with a lot of my experiences online as well. It's like,
well, I mean, if somebody's got if somebody's down there and they have financial problems, mm-hmm. and they get a big paycheck, and then they go spend all their money on new clothes and new hair and new car, and you go, you didn't pay your rent yet. I mean, mm-hmm. you got to pay your rent before you spend money on those other things. And they're going like, yeah, but I got a new car. So you're trying to use logic,
right?
But isn't this cool? It's red. It's cool. And it's fast, and it goes 0 to 60 and whatever.
Right.
Now let's move up one more and go to if you're looking at it from the next context. If you're looking at it from the spiritual context, now your ego is significantly less. You're melting from the center, as Adyashanti calls it, mm-hmm. and the ego is significantly less of an encapsulation of who you are. The ego is less influential. It's not as compressing. It's not as thick, the ego. Right. You're actually, from a higher perspective, just like in aviation, the higher up you go, the more you can see. Well, the same thing's going on right here. The higher up you go, the more the level of awareness that you have, and the more you can see, okay, well, he's using logic and they're not using logic down there. So, I see what's happening here. Now, is the person up there on the top going to be arguing with the people down below? Well, maybe for a moment or two, and realize I'm not getting anywhere. Or if you get to the point where somebody is above, banging their head against the bottom of the yellow line, and I use that mental picture there, this is going to be somebody who's going to try to rationalize the spiritual teachings. So you got somebody above the yellow line who's going to be saying like, here's what it looks like, and you got somebody going like, yeah, well, you can't turn bread into you can't turn a loaf of bread into to be able to feed all these people. And so you try to use logic. And I'm not saying that's a true story. I'm just saying that that's a manifestation of how that can work. Mm-hmm. You have somebody believing something completely different in a spiritual sense, and then you try to logic your way into the spiritual level, and then the people at the spiritual level can't logic it down to the next level below.
Right.
So that's how this works. So when you're higher up, you have a greater perspective. You can see more things potentially. Now there is a couple of caveats, a couple of provisos that say that if your ego takes you up and you get a glimpse of something above, then you can use that, and you can use the spiritual ego can hijack that, and you can use that in a righteous way, which has happened to a lot of religions. Mm-hmm. So you understand the higher levels, but use it as a weapon down below. Well, you can use it as a logic down below, and then down below the red line, you're using it as a weapon. Mm-hmm. So you can take the spiritual teaching and below the red line, you can use it as a weapon, which gives us the Crusades and spiritual cleansing and ethnic cleansing and all that. Mm-hmm. That you can use it from a logical perspective, and you can try to logic your way out of it, but you're still not at the same level of the place where it came from, where it originated. And it's to unify, and it's to love one another, and it's to treat your neighbors as yourself, because ultimately when you go above that blue line, your neighbor is you.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, no, this is tremendous. You weren't kidding about this when you were talking about it last time.
Yeah.
This is wow.
Okay.
Yeah, it ties everything together really nicely.
Oh, this is a great segue for the next section, because this is just getting started.
I can't wait, man. This is awesome.
So when we go to the next time on Greg and Ollie, what we're going to find is, okay, now we had the beliefs, and we talked about the genesis of beliefs, the formation of beliefs, the belief cycle. We had all that, right? And now we're talking about the levels of consciousness, and we talked about where we float. Now, you're going to be born back to the collective beliefs. You're going to be born at one of these levels, right? You don't have any choice. I mean, some people might say you had a pre-life choice, but we're talking about at what we're talking about here.
Right.
You're born at one of these levels, and maybe your life's mission is to either experience one of these levels. Maybe your life's mission is to transcend these levels. Maybe your life's mission is, if you were born at the top, one of the higher levels, is to teach and to help people to climb these levels. But where we're headed with this is, the next step is, how do we transcend these levels? How do we move from one level to the next, if we are so inclined, based on our beliefs? And that's where I want to go for the next time we talk.
That's awesome, man. So awesome. So now we'll talk about navigating this landscape that you've basically mapped out for us in the last 3 videos.
Yep. Okay, let's do it in a video game kind of a scenario. You got all these tools, which are your beliefs, and all these things that you got in your little satchel that you walk around with. You're navigating this right here that we're looking at, the focus and perspective. You're navigating that map.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to show you how to navigate better, or at least know where you're headed and the effects of those tools. One last thing about what we've talked about in this section here is that everybody's on here somewhere, and most people really can't help it. So this is where forgiveness comes into play. It's not even forgiveness. It's like, well, it is what it is, and they are who they are, and they're acting out in the way that they know how to do based on where they are. It's not good or bad. It's not, again, this is not something to use as a weapon. It's not a judgment.
No.
Bricks. We got to have everybody here. Otherwise, the society doesn't work. And now it's helped me become way more compassionate or understanding. Is that if that's your point of view and that's the way that's the way the world looks to you, I understand. I'm with you, and I don't see it that way, but I don't judge you for it.
Yeah, that's I think Epictetus, who used to coach his students, to say, when you get into an argument or a disagreement with people and they're holding on to their view, you just say, "It seems so to them."
Yeah,
go to them.
Exactly right.
Don't get bent out of shape. Don't get upset. Or when people insult you, when people say bad things about you that you know are untrue, you just say, "It seems so to them." Right. Looking forward to the next episode. And unfortunately, I have to run, but this was awesome. I can't wait to go through this and edit it and post it.
Well, I appreciate your efforts in doing that, because the last one was terrific, and I appreciated that. And looking forward to seeing this one.
Yeah, I think this one will be our best work yet.
Good. Take
Thanks
care.
a lot, man. Cheers.
Bye-bye.